Hey, it's Steve and welcome back. Now, if it wasn't obvious from that quick intro, this time we're going to look at the Wecreat Auto Pass-Through Feeder. It's a very nice addition to the Wecreat ecosystem. If you've got a Vision 40 watt or 20 watt, this is a great thing to have if you do a lot of long materials or larger than the workspace will say. So in this video, what I'll show you, I don't do unboxings, but I'll show you a quick bit of the assembly because there's quite a few pieces here that you have to put together. It doesn't take long, but I'll show you that. I'll also show you a little more detail on how I created that welcome sign. And then I'll do a couple of other tests, and I'll also show you something special because this thing isn't dedicated to just the Wecreat lasers, and I'll show you a little sample using something else. So with that, let's get started, and we'll start with some quick assembly here. All right, I'll just do a quick overview of the assembly. There's 4 frame pieces that you put together, and you basically bolt the 2 side rails in. Start with the first one and then rotate the whole assembly around and put the second one in. There's just 2 screws at each end, so it's pretty simple to put together. Next, string the cable through a hole in the right hand channel, and we'll use that later to plug into the laser. This will actually be the left hand side of the frame when we get the laser on. Take the roller, which is the whole core of this assembly, and slide it into holes provided on the front rail, and then a couple of screws to put that in. Again, pretty simple assembly. There's a roller on the back to roll the material, and then drop the frame pieces in and put the laser on top. So it'll take 15 minutes maybe to put this together. Again, I'm just showing you because some things can be upside down and whatnot here. When you finally get the laser on top, you can just run the cable plug into the rotary slot, and then there's a zip tie there that you can put all the extra cable in so it doesn't get in the way. So that's the assembly. It is, as I said, relatively simple, but there's a few gotchas there. That's why I showed you any of this at all. Again, 15 minutes and you're good to go. Now, the last thing you're going to want to do is put as many conveyor feeder rails on as you're going to need for your material. I have a whole box full of these things, so I can do up to 147 inches, but I don't actually have a piece of material that long. So, and really, I don't have shop space for that either. So I'll probably never use anything that long. But if you have, maybe you're engraving a sign from maybe an 8-foot sheet of plywood, you'll have no trouble handling it here. The mechanism is really elegant and really simple, and it seems to work really well as far as pulling straight and doing all the things you would expect a conveyor to do. Now, as far as the software here, you're going to start in the flat mode, but I'm going to pick the auto pass-through just so that I'm using the rollers, and I'll paste my welcome sign in here. Now, there's 2 layers here. There's the welcome text, which is an engrave, and then the red outline is a cut. For the engrave, I'll use about 75% power at 600 millimeters a second. And for the cut, it will be 100% power at 10 millimeters a second. This material, by the way, is just kind of like MDF, but it's a paper material, so it cuts really easily. Anyway, that's all you have to do. Then you can just send it to the laser and start cutting. One of the things Wecreat claims is that this auto pass-through feeder can be used with other lasers more than just the Wecreat Vision, for example. So if you have your own laser, in theory, you can drop it onto this feeder and it will just work. Now, that claim is possibly a bit dubious, and I'll elaborate on that a little later, but in the meantime, let's talk about this. This is the cable they provide that will connect their auto pass-through feeder to a laser. And it just plugs onto the end of their existing cable, so if you don't have a Wecreat Vision or you want to use this on a different laser, you can just plug this in. Now, it's not quite that simple, so what I want to do here is elaborate on some of the setup I had to do to make the Acmer P2 run on this feeder. So the first step is to drop the laser onto the feeder frame, and that hopefully fits. Not all lasers are the same size, but then you need to plug in the cable. Now, you can use the Y-axis if you have access to it. I'm using the rotary here, so I plugged it in there and turned it on. And now we no longer have limit switches, so we need to go to relative positioning, so current position. And I'm going to set the Y-axis to something much larger, the height. Now, I have to go into machine settings and I have to turn off the limit switches because I no longer have one for the Y-axis. And then you go into this scary dark zone in the settings where you'll get this ominous message that you can really screw up your laser, and you certainly can if you're not careful. Because I noticed that the number of steps per millimeter for the y-axis isn't correct on the feeder, so I had to go calculate that and change it. I set it to 175 here, but actually by the time I got this working it was 185. And I also noticed that the maximum speed was way too high for the feeder, so I dropped that in half. And I'll say keep in mind that you have to remember what these settings were or write them down, because if you remove your laser from the feeder, you'll have to put all these things back, otherwise your laser won't work as expected. So with the laser set up on the feeder, I'm ready to start a project. So what I did was I just loaded in my logo here. Now this is an image and it's relatively small, but I'm going to scale it up so that the length of it, which is the height on the screen here, is 800 millimeters. So that's about twice the size of the work area that I have normally on the laser. As far as settings, 400 millimeters a second at 90% power. Now these were a little dim and you'll see it in the results. And as far as the interval there, you see I went fairly coarse at 0.2. So when the engraving starts, it does what you would expect it to do. And keep in mind, this is an Acmer P2 doing this, and the result looks like any other engraving job, except it's twice as long as I could normally cut on an Acmer P2. So that's the Wecreat Auto Pass-Through Feeder. In general, I think you'd be happy with it, but there's a couple of things I want to talk about here that they did really well, and certainly some things I think that they definitely have to look at. On the pro side, it is a solid feeder. In general, feeders involve you stacking your laser on top of something and hoping for the best. Here it actually was pretty easy to set up, especially with the Wecreat Vision, not surprisingly, and it just worked. It wasn't really a whole lot of hoops to jump through. Next on the list here, there's tons of expansion capability. You can pretty much put any size material you want on this. At 147 inches, I don't even know what material you would use. I certainly didn't have any material long enough in my shop to use that much. The final thing here on the pro side, I know this is relative, but I think for what you get, it's priced reasonably well, starting around $475 US. So keep that in mind. It isn't the cheapest, but I think for the money, it's the best. Now, on the con side, there were definitely things I think they need to work on. I found the alignment here fairly challenging. When you put material in, it's only held by the rollers. And if your material is really long, that's kind of a fulcrum where things can pivot. And I found even at a 4-foot long piece of material, it was moving around just by framing it. It wasn't, when I was done framing, it wasn't in the same spot it was when I started framing. So I think what they need to do is take a lesson from the printer companies where they have guides on the paper feeder to keep the paper square and ensure that it's going into the printer properly. I think they could leverage some idea like that. Next on the list, it's not as compatible as suggested or advertised, we'll say. Yes, they provide a cable, but before I got the Acmer P2 running, I tried 3 other lasers and I had no way to plug their feeder into those lasers because newer lasers tend to have more closed kind of wiring, and it just wasn't possible. The Acmer allowed me to do it because it has a rotary connector at the back, and I leveraged that. And again, as a result of that, I had to jump through a couple of hoops with settings as well. And finally, I think the maximum material thickness that you can put into this is maybe a little thinner than most people would expect. Wecreat claims it's 14 millimeters, but I don't honestly know how they would get 14 millimeter material into this without hitting the laser, especially if you have a Wecreat Vision. Maybe a third-party laser you could get a thicker material in, but either way, even if 14 millimeters is the maximum, that's around a ½ an inch, and that limits you pretty much to plywood or material like plywood. So that may not be perfect for some people. It would have been nice if you could put a 2x4 in there and engrave it if that's what you wanted to do, but you are going to be limited with the thickness. So take a look at those specs on the Wecreat site just to make sure that this will do what you want. And with that, I'm pretty happy with it. As I mentioned, I'll put an affiliate link in the description down below if you want to pick one of these up. if you already have a Wecreat Vision, but if you're buying a new Wecreat Vision, I seriously would suggest you consider packaging the feeder in with it. They have pretty good deals on the package price right now. Now, if you do have a third-party laser and you're not sure whether it'll work, please don't ask me because I won't know. Talk to Wecreat and get them to confirm before you push the buy button if you're trying to put this on a third-party laser. And with that, I'll wind down and I'll say get out there, make your world, and I'll see you next time.